Imagine flipping through a textbook, scrolling through a museum exhibit, or watching a documentary on human evolution and noticing something strange. Every early human, every ancestral figure, looks surprisingly familiar. Pale skin, European facial features, straight or wavy hair. They might be hunched over, using primitive tools, or wearing rough animal hides. But their faces, they look like modern Europeans. For decades, this has been the default image of humanity's beginnings. But here's the catch. It's completely, scientifically wrong. The truth is far more fascinating. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, originated in equatorial Africa regions drenched in sunlight, with UV levels far stronger than most places on Earth today. Surviving here wasn't about luck, it was about adaptation. Dark skin evolved not as a fashion choice or a minor trait, but as an essential shield, protecting our ancestors from sunburn, DNA damage, hint, skin cancer, and even reproductive complications caused by folate depletion. In other words, dark skin wasn't optional, it was survival. Yet, despite overwhelming evidence from genetics, evolutionary biology, denoflavel, and environmental science, the popular images we've grown up with continue to misrepresent the first humans. Mitochondrial Eve, the woman whose maternal lineage connects every living human, was dark-skinned. The earliest Homo sapiens were dark-skinned. For nearly 200,000 years of human history, this was the natural state of humanity. Light skin came later, in specific populations adapting to lower UV environments. In this video, we're diving deep into the science, the genetics, and the evolution that prove early humans were dark-skinned, facts too often ignored in textbooks and media. If you're ready to see human history the way it truly happened, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us on this journey to uncover the real face of humanity. You won't want to miss a single revelation. Long before the maps of the modern world were drawn, and long before humans spread across continents, the story of our species began under the relentless sun of equatorial Africa, in landscapes that stretched from savannas to forests, where the sunlight was intense enough to sear unprotected skin within minutes. This was the crucible in which Homo sapiens emerged, not in temperate or shaded regions, but in a place where survival demanded extraordinary biological adaptations. For early humans, life was not about comfort or convenience. It was a constant negotiation with the environment, and every feature of the body carried a story of endurance and resilience. Among these adaptations, dark skin was not merely an aesthetic trait, but a vital shield forged by millions of years of evolution, designed to protect against the harsh ultraviolet radiation that poured down from the sky. The sunlight in equatorial Africa was not gentle. It was a force that shaped life itself. UV radiation penetrates the skin, damaging DNA and leading to potentially fatal consequences like skin cancer, mutations, and reproductive challenges. For the early humans living in this unforgiving climate, melanin pigment that darkens skin was life itself. It absorbed and scattered the harmful rays, preventing the breakdown of folate, a B vitamin critical for fertility, fetal development, and the healthy formation of new cells. Without this protection, populations could not survive or thrive. Babies might be born with severe developmental defects, fertility rates would plummet, and whole communities could fail to sustain themselves. The evolution of dark skin was not a choice, nor a decorative feature. It was a functional, life-saving adaptation that allowed our ancestors to endure under one of the most intense solar environments on Earth. As these early humans moved, hunted, and formed communities, their dark skin remained a constant, visible testament to their survival. Every gene that contributed to pigmentation carried the story of necessity, of adaptation to an environment where exposure to the sun was unavoidable, and shelter or clothing offered only limited protection. For tens of thousands of years, this was the standard human condition. There were no light-skinned populations yet. The mutations that would later create variations in skin color were still in the distant future, emerging only as humans gradually migrated to regions with less sunlight, where the balance between UV protection and vitamin D synthesis demanded a different approach. The landscapes of equatorial Africa were not just a backdrop, they were an active participant in shaping humanity. Rivers, grasslands, and forests created challenges and opportunities, but above all, it was the sun that dictated the rules of survival. Those early humans who adapted to this relentless radiation, who carried the genes for darker skin, lived to pass on their traits, while those less suited to the environment were gradually weeded out by the harsh realities of nature. In this way, the interplay between environment and biology sculpted the very face of humanity, embedding resilience into our DNA and shaping not just our skin color, but the fundamental story of who we are and where we come from. Understanding that Homo sapiens arose in such conditions allows us to see dark skin not as a variation or a modern social construct, but as the original and necessary state of human beings, an ancient marker of survival and adaptation. It reminds us that the first humans were intrinsically tied to the African landscapes they inhabited, molded by sunlight, climate, and geography into beings capable of thriving in one of the most challenging environments on the planet. The story of humanity begins here, beneath an unyielding sun, with dark-skinned ancestors whose evolution tells a tale of resilience, intelligence, and the profound ways the natural world shapes life. As the first Homo sapiens navigated the vast plains and forests of equatorial Africa, the sun was both a source of life and a relentless threat, casting intense ultraviolet rays that penetrated unprotected skin with invisible, yet devastating force. Survival in this environment was not determined merely by strength or agility, but by the body's ability to endure exposure to an element that could alter DNA, cause debilitating disease, and compromise the very ability to reproduce. In this context, dark skin was far more than a color. It was a sophisticated shield, an evolutionary masterpiece designed to preserve life under conditions that would have quickly destroyed those less adapted. Every layer of melanin embedded in the skin absorbed and scattered the sun's harmful radiation, mitigating the risk of cellular damage that could lead to mutations or cancers, ensuring that the earliest humans could survive long enough to raise families and continue the lineage of their species. The sunlight of equatorial Africa was relentless, and with it came the silent threat of folate depletion, a danger largely invisible but catastrophic in its consequences. Folate, a B vitamin essential for DNA synthesis and cell division, plays a critical role in fertility and the development of healthy offspring. Without adequate protection, exposure to intense UV radiation could break down folate in the bloodstream, leading to severe birth defects, pregnancy complications, deep level, and reduced fertility among both men and women. Dark skin acted as a natural safeguard, preserving this vital nutrient and allowing populations to thrive where the sun shone without respite. It was a subtle, powerful form of adaptation, one that ensured the survival not only of individuals but of entire communities, embedding the capacity for resilience and reproduction into the very biology of humanity. In this world, infections and disease were constant companions, exacerbated by skin damage from repeated sunburns and burns that left early humans vulnerable to pathogens. Melanin's protective effect went beyond UV absorption. It also reduced the frequency and severity of injuries that could lead to life-threatening infections, providing another layer of security that enhanced the chances of survival. Those early humans with insufficient pigmentation faced the harshest consequences: shortened lifespans, diminished reproductive success, and in many cases, premature death. Through countless generations, natural selection favored those whose skin carried the pigment necessary to endure these challenges, gradually embedding dark skin as the defining trait of humanity in its place of origin. This interplay between environment, biology, and survival reveals a profound truth. Dark skin was not an incidental feature, a minor genetic variation, or a product of aesthetic preference. It was an indispensable adaptation that allowed our ancestors to navigate a world dominated by the sun. It shaped their daily lives, their ability to reproduce, and ultimately the trajectory of the human species. Every dark-skinned ancestor carried within them a story of resilience, a testament to the evolutionary pressures that molded humanity into a form capable of enduring one of the most challenging natural environments on Earth. Through this lens, we can see that the color of skin is a living record of adaptation, of survival strategies honed over hundreds of thousands of years. Dark skin tells the story of life under the African sun, a narrative of protection, endurance, and the delicate balance between environmental danger and biological innovation. It ensured that early humans not only survived the perils of their environment, but flourished, passing on their genetic legacy to the generations that would one day carry humanity across the globe, always with the mark of its origins etched in the natural armor of their ancestors. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human story unfolded under the relentless sun of Africa, where dark skin was not just common, but essential, embedded deep within the genetic code of every Homo sapiens. As populations thrived across the equatorial landscapes, their DNA carried the signature of survival, the alleles responsible for producing abundant melanin, a natural shield against the intense ultraviolet radiation that defined their environment. These dark skin alleles were the ancestral foundation of humanity, the starting point from which all later variations would emerge. Every cell, every gene, bore the imprint of generations shaped by sunlight, heat, and the demands of living where the sun's rays could sear unprotected flesh within moments. In these ancestral populations, dark skin was the baseline, the natural state of the species, honed over tens of thousands of years to protect life, preserve fertility, and ensure the continuation of the human line. It was only much later, as some groups of humans migrated far from the equator into northern latitudes, that the story began to change. The sunlight in these regions was weaker, the winters long, and the UV radiation insufficient to trigger the same levels of vitamin D synthesis essential for healthy bone development and immune function. In these low UV environments, natural selection favored mutations that lightened the skin, allowing enough sunlight to penetrate and support vital biological processes. Genetic studies have traced these changes with remarkable clarity. Genes such as SLC24A5 and SLC45A2, which play major roles in pigmentation, reveal a pattern that speaks directly to this evolutionary journey. The versions associated with dark skin are ancestral, the original blueprint of humanity, while the lighter variants appeared later, roughly between 8,000 and 30,000 years ago, in populations adapting to environments far from their equatorial origins. These mutations were not random aesthetic shifts. They were functional responses to entirely new environmental pressures, innovations in human biology that allowed survival and reproduction in worlds bathed in less intense sunlight. This genetic timeline also reframes how we understand human history. For the vast majority of our species' existence, dark skin was universal, a constant feature across the landscapes of Africa. From the savannas to the forests, light skin, by contrast, is a relatively recent development, arising long after humans had already migrated beyond their ancestral home. It underscores the fact that what many cultures have treated as the default human appearance, a pale skin, is not ancient, not original, but a product of adaptation to specific regions and climates. The genes of our ancestors tell a story that no artistic reconstruction or textbook illustration can fully capture. For nearly 200,000 years, humanity was dark-skinned, and every light-skinned population today carries with it a history of migration, mutation, and adaptation to environments very different from those where our species first evolved. Understanding this genetic reality also dissolves myths that have persisted in popular imagination for centuries. Early humans were not racially ambiguous, nor did they resemble Europeans in appearance. They were dark-skinned Africans, perfectly adapted to the sun-scorched landscapes of their origins. The emergence of lighter skin was a late chapter in the human story, a testament to the flexibility and adaptability of our species as it spread across the globe. By tracing these alleles through time and geography, science reveals the true narrative embedded in our DNA, a story of endurance, adaptation, and migration that begins in Africa and radiates outward, showing that dark skin was humanity's starting point and light skin an evolutionary innovation born of entirely new challenges and environments. Through the lens of genetics, the journey of skin color is a living record of human evolution, a bridge connecting biology, environment, and history. It reminds us that the face of early humanity was African, and that every variation we see today is the result of survival strategies finely tuned over millennia, a testament to the remarkable interplay between our genes and the world we inhabit. Deep in the heart of Africa, hundreds of thousands of years ago, lived a woman whose genetic legacy would echo through every human being alive today, a figure science calls Mitochondrial Eve. She was not a queen in the traditional sense, nor a singular standout in her community, but she carries an extraordinary significance. Through her maternal lineage, she connects every person on Earth to a single origin point, and she, like the earliest populations of Homo sapiens, had dark skin, a feature shaped by the intense equatorial sun and preserved across countless generations through the unbroken chain of adaptation and survival. This realization transforms the way we understand the story of humanity, placing Africa at Europe, not Asia, not the Middle East as the undeniable cradle of our species, and dark skin as the ancestral trait that defines our beginnings. The environment in which Mitochondrial Eve lived was relentless and demanding. The sun poured down with an intensity that made life without natural protection impossible, and the evolutionary response to this harsh climate was dark, melanin-rich skin. It shielded the body from DNA damage, skin cancers, infections, and folate depletion that could compromise fertility, ensuring that her community not only survived but thrived. Every child born under that African sun carried the imprint of these adaptations, a living testament to resilience and the intimate connection between biology and environment. The genes that produced this pigmentation were ancestral, present in her DNA, and through her lineage. These genetic markers were passed down, becoming the foundation of human skin color for the vast majority of the species' existence. As humans began to migrate out of Africa tens of thousands of years later, dark skin remained the default. Populations carried this ancestral trait into the deserts, forests, and savannas of their new worlds, each generation shaped by the same pressures that had governed life in equatorial Africa. Only after migrating into regions with less ultraviolet radiation did mutations appear that lightened skin, allowing adequate vitamin D production in environments where sunlight was scarce. These adaptations occurred much later and were limited to specific populations. For the entirety of early human history, from the first Homo sapiens to the first waves of migration, dark skin was the universal human trait. Mitochondrial Eve and her contemporaries embodied this reality, illustrating that the origin of humanity is rooted firmly in Africa and that the first humans looked very different from the Europeanized images long presented in textbooks and media. Understanding this ancestral connection reshapes our view of human history. The appearance of early humans was not a matter of cultural representation or artistic interpretation. It was dictated by survival, biology, and environmental pressures. The dark skin of Mitochondrial Eve was an adaptation, a tool for enduring one of the harshest climates on Earth, and it serves as a reminder that the foundations of humanity lie in Africa. Every individual alive today, regardless of their skin tone, carries fragments of this legacy, threads that trace back to populations perfectly adapted to equatorial life and to a woman whose maternal lineage connects us all. The story of Mitochondrial Eve is more than a tale of ancestry. It is a narrative of endurance, adaptation, and interconnectedness. It anchors humanity in a place and a reality often overlooked, showing that the first humans were dark-skinned Africans whose survival strategies shaped the course of our species. By recognizing this, we can finally reconcile the scientific evidence with our understanding of human origins, acknowledging that Africa is not merely a point on a map, but the very stage upon which the earliest chapters of our story were written, illuminated by the sun and carried forward through generations, forever embedded in the DNA of every person alive today, for centuries. The image of early humans that most of us have carried in our minds has been shaped less by science and more by cultural assumptions. Museums displayed reconstructions with pale, European features. Textbooks illustrated ancestors who looked strikingly familiar to Western audiences, and documentaries cast actors who bore little resemblance to the true populations of early Homo sapiens. These depictions were never the result of scientific uncertainty. The evidence has long been clear. Modern humans originated in Africa, with dark skin as the ancestral trait. Yet, for generations, the visual story told to the world suggested otherwise. This disconnect between evidence and imagery is rooted in historical and cultural bias. a legacy of the times when European scientists and artists unconsciously, sometimes consciously projected themselves onto the past, imagining human evolution through the lens of their own features rather than the reality of the data. Correcting these depictions is more than a matter of accuracy. It is an act of aligning our collective understanding with the truth that science provides. Every time a museum updates an exhibit, every time a textbook illustrates early humans with darker skin, every time a documentary portrays ancestors as they really were, we are not just changing images, we are reshaping the way people perceive the very origins of humanity. Accurate representation acknowledges that Africa is the cradle of our species, that mitochondrial Eve and the earliest humans were dark-skinned, and that these traits were essential adaptations for survival in equatorial environments. It allows us to see human history clearly, without the distortions of centuries-old biases, and reminds us that the story of our species begins in Africa, with ancestors perfectly adapted to their environment. Understanding this truth does not diminish anyone's heritage, erase diversity, or rewrite modern identities. Instead, it honors the scientific record, celebrates the ingenuity of human adaptation, and acknowledges the real faces of those who came before us. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable historical biases, to question why certain narratives dominated for so long, and to appreciate that accurate representation is not political, it is factual, it is educational, and it is overdue. By updating the visual narrative, we give future generations the tools to understand humanity as it truly began, fostering a deeper appreciation for both the science and the people behind it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the origins of humanity and the remarkable story of our ancestors. If this video changed the way you see human history, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode where we uncover the real stories science has revealed. Sharing this knowledge helps correct long-standing misconceptions and spreads a more accurate understanding of who we are, where we came from, and the extraordinary resilience of those who lived under the African sun. Together, we can ensure that the images and stories of our origins reflect the truth, honoring the dark-skinned ancestors from whom all humans descend, and celebrating the beauty, complexity, and richness of the human journey as it was meant to be told.